Welcome everybody to the session that is titled Combinator Unlocked. So we're going to put the Y back in, the Y Combinator in this session. We're going to talk about everything that goes on at Y Combinator, and many of you will know about it. Many of you will have questions and a curiosity about Y Combinator. So this is the right session to be in. And we will probably, in the course of the next hour, kind of 50 minutes, explain a little bit about the mystery that surrounds Y Combinator and maybe demystify it ever so slightly. So I am very honored to have as guests today at GES two partners from Y Combinator. Michael Siebel is, do you pronounce it Siebel or Seibel?
Seibel.
Okay, he's Michael Seibel. He's not Michael Siebel. Michael is a partner at Y Combinator. He recently became a partner, and he's very focused on international expansion, international development, international strategies, and everything that's going to enhance and help expand Y Combinator more globally. A bit about Michael, because he's probably too modest to tell you himself, but he is a founding CEO of two prestigious companies that we know pretty well here in the Valley. One was Justin TV. Another was SocialCam, and SocialCam actually went through the Y Combinator program in 2012. It was sold to Autodesk, and then in 2014, Justin TV became Twitch Interactive, was later sold to Amazon for $970 million. So a pretty incredible exit there. So thank you for joining us, Michael.
Thank you.
It's an understatement.
It's pretty good.
It's great.
It is, understatements. And then we also have Kassar Younis, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Y Combinator and was appointed COO last August 2015. Kassar is also a founding CEO. He actually started a company called Talkbin, and again has a very international flavor because he was born in Pakistan, grew up in Detroit, ended up here in the Valley. So welcome, both of you, to this panel.
Detroit is almost international. It's so different.
That's true. That's true. It's over there somewhere.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for giving up your time. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but more importantly, we're going to get to the point where you guys can ask some questions of Michael and Kassar. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to get in, how not to get rejected by Y Combinator, if there is a secret sauce or if there are criteria that matter. This is the place that we're hopefully going to find out about that. So my first question, knowing how incredible Y Combinator is, over 1,000 companies since 2005, with a cumulative valuation of over $65 billion. It's pretty impressive. But how did that happen? And how does it occur? You have over 2,400 founders, alumni in the community, and it's a really rich family. I mean, we know a lot of YC companies, and they really support each other. It's pretty incredible, this community. So can you tell us, Michael, when you look at applications, what are the things that you can share that you see that really help people get through, cut through the noise, right? You must see thousands and thousands of these. What are the 5 things that you really see and you think, you know what, that's going to make a difference?
Yes. So it might be helpful. How many of you guys are interested in applying to YC? Raise your hand. All right, that's good. Okay. So
does anybody not know basically what YC does?
Good.
That's good.
Oh, one person. We're a startup accelerator. All right.
The startup accelerator.
So about 6,000 companies apply to YC every 6 months. And so as partners, we're tasked with reading a large number of applications. And really the application is the first time we really get to know the company. And so what I thought would be helpful is really just to break down, from my perspective, when I'm reading your application, what I'm looking for. And first things first, you have to understand the physical structure of the application. I read the application from top to bottom. If there's something really, really amazing in your application, you should just try to get it up as opposed to leave it way down at the bottom. The other thing is that I watch your video first. And so that's really, your video is not like an afterthought. It's not like the thing I might see at the end. It's literally your first impression. The second thing you need to understand about mindset is that in many ways, reading the application is a screening process. I'm not looking to fall in love. I'm actually just looking to figure out how many red flags your company has. And like if it's not too many, you're through. If it's like an overwhelming amount, there's a problem. So when I'm looking for kind of red flags or like check boxes, I guess, positives, negatives, I start with the team. Looking for 2 to 4 co-founders who are all working full-time, who at least someone on the team, hopefully more than one person, is technical, actively writing code, actively building hardware. Team has known each other for at least 6 months. This isn't some kind of founder dating company where the founders met 2 weeks ago. They will work on this startup regardless of whether they get into YC. And they decided to split equity equally or close to equally. Now, no company is perfect, and probably every single company in this current YC batch might have one of those that they don't qualify as, but I don't think there's a single one that has all of those that they don't. So that's the first thing. And I'm just scanning your application to find those pieces of information out. What I'm not looking for is your resume, accomplishments, awards, any credentials. I just don't care. So if you have a bunch of those red flags, just think, maybe I should fix some of them. Most of them are very, very fixable. That's typically the primary screen. The second screen I look at is traction. And when most people talk about traction, they think, oh, I have to be launched and I have to be growing. That's not how I think about traction at all. What I basically do is I look at how long you've been running your company and what you've done in that period of time. And I want it to be impressive. If you're a medical device that requires FDA approval, you've been operating the company for a year, you probably don't have customers, right? If you are a mobile app and you've been operating the company for 2 years, you certainly should have many customers. So what I do by looking at the amount of time you guys have been working on your startup is I try to figure out, am I impressed with what you've accomplished? And a lot of people fall down on this front. A lot of the people feel like they're preconditions to getting started. A lot of people feel like, oh, I have to have this and this before I launch, or I have to have this and this before I want to open my beta or tell the world. Those are things that are very negative.
Or they think funding is the first step.
Or they think funding is the first step. Very negative. Then the last thing I think about is market. And like, I don't spend too much time thinking about this, but I just think in my head, if this gets big, can I imagine it being a billion-dollar company? Or is there some kind of like, have you constructed this idea in such a way where like, it couldn't be?
It's important also to emphasize, that Michael just said it kind of pretty quickly about this multi-billion-dollar company. We're looking to fund large companies. There's a reason we don't fund like local restaurants or a local small business. And probably a startup is a business. Probably the only difference between a startup and a business, the reason we call startups startups and not just small businesses, is the ability to get scale pretty significantly. And most commonly, and the reason we sit in the valley is that's through software. There are ways to do it through hardware, but margins and some other dynamics kind of depress the probability of that happening. So it's an important component. Like, there should be a path to being a public company. Now, that's not saying that if you're building a business that doesn't have an intention to be a public company, that you're somehow not building a business or it's not as good. It's just probably not right for venture funding.
So those are the 3 things: team, traction, market. It's actually like really that simple. And so what most people don't realize is they think 6,000 applications, only 100 companies get in. It's really hard to get into YC. Well, what you don't see is that a lot of those 6,000 applications, I would say, are not real applications. It's not a real application if you're not going to do your startup unless you get into YC. It's not a real application if you're building a technology company and no one on your team knows how to build technology. Right? Like, those are fake applications. Those are like, so in reality, if you have a real application, your chances of getting an interview is very, very high. And once you get an interview, your chance of getting into YC is 25%. So it's actually a lot easier to get into YC than a lot of people think. And sometimes people say, oh, they try to compare it with the admissions rate into like Harvard or Yale or whatever. That's not a fair comparison. The difference is, are you serious, or do you want us to somehow validate you before you get started? So those are the three things. Very simple.
I read applications similarly, so I don't rehash the process. Generally, linearly, top down. Probably the key thing that I do that Michael hasn't identified, or at least in his process, is when I read just a quick description, conciseness is very important. Your ability to, and before I used to think, well, you know, maybe presentation skills aren't not important because that's kind of like this lame MBA thing of doing presentation skills. But actually, it is important that you can speak concisely and clearly, because if you can't speak concisely to explain to us what your business is and why it's valuable, you probably won't be able to do it to your customers and to employees that you're recruiting, and then ultimately for the financing rounds. So it actually becomes a metric in itself, or a filter in itself. So I read the description, and then there's something in my mind almost exclusive. It's like, oh, I don't believe this assumption, or I'm testing this assumption. Rarely is an idea just so wonderful that you're like, oh, this, you know, clearly regardless of the founder. And most likely it's usually, oh, well, the founding team. Like, this is seemingly good, but really will be good or bad based on the founding team. So you jump to the founding team, kind of consume the rest of the application. Like I said, very similar to Michael. I think the key thing that all of you should, if you're applying, and this is probably from more than just YC, which is in general, is show the way you describe your company to somebody who has no context and tell them to explain it back to you. Like, when people describe something like, oh, I'm building a mobile platform for engaging, you know, streaming, you know, creators, and they use all these words which are in themselves loaded. Like, platform can mean many different things. Content creator can mean many different things. And so you, in your mind, have simplified it by creating a short sentence with these like loaded terms, but you've actually made it very, very complicated. So just a quick, how do you explain what you're doing simply? Do it in the most literal way possible. So
Let's give an example.
Yeah, so I'll use, you know, our company went through YC. We had an app, which you open up when you go to a small business or a large business, a physical business, allows you to communicate with that business through text.
There we go.
There's nobody in this room who's like, okay, it's a platform. The details of being iOS or Android or text or how the merchant gets that information is all secondary to you first understanding what does the product actually do.
I like using Google for that, because like we will read applications where people will say, you know, Google organizes the world's information through crawling the web. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
Like, if you write that, you might think it sounds cool and impressive, but if I don't know what you can't sell me if I don't understand what your company does. As opposed to saying Google is a website where you type in what you want to know, and it gives you websites that are relevant to your question.
Yeah. Or even more specifically, Google's a website that has a box, and in this box you type in a question. Like, you have to be that literal.
And you won't sound stupid.
And the reason founders don't want to do it is because I think they feel like, well, if I just say that it's something like you walk into a Starbucks and you can send a message to start, that sounds so lame. It doesn't seem like a public company. That's a luxury to have that problem. If people don't understand what you're doing, you're already lost. So when I'm reading the application, and really for all this stuff, you have to be very clear in explanation. But I think otherwise, the same as Michael.
That was a long answer.
Along the lines of pitch your mom, and if your mom can pitch it back to you, you're a winner.
Yeah.
They don't do that, though.
Yeah.
People don't
do
that.
that.
And
Yeah.
also moms, I think, just nod and say, that sounds nice, honey.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they don't give real
Yeah.
feedback.
Or your friends, or so. That's
Yeah.
why you really go to somebody who has no context.
And
Because
not
you-
like an MBA type person, because like, you know when someone gives you advice, you don't need advice. You need to know whether they actually understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. Advice is not relevant here.
Yeah, my mom didn't get it when I pitched her.
And also, I think I've always reacted kind of negative to the pitch concept. A lot of people talk about how do I pitch my company better. The best way to pitch your company better is to have a better company. Like, there's no, and it's really hard to get that across because there's so much emphasis on pitching and pitch competitions and pitch this and pitch that. No, you're trying to build a good business. I guarantee you, if you have a good business and you have an arm growing out of your forehead, I will fund you.
Yep.
Because I don't this is a good business.
Yep.
And you could be completely polished and, dressed right or whatever it is, whatever thing, people think is, and if the business is not good, you're not going to get funding. This is the reality of the situation. There's a reason that there's this almost like glorification of nerds in the valley. It's because it's just an acknowledgement that superficial stuff doesn't matter.
I love that. That's definitely tweetable YC. So talking of founders, right, and founding teams, because you both touched on it, but diving a bit deeper, can you each find one really compelling story, like something that really jumped out at you, say in the last year? Fascinating, interesting, or surprising. So someone that you met or a founder that you saw or, an application that you read through or something where something happened to really change your mind or kind of come out in the last year that made you go, wow?
This is a couple years ago, but I went to a conference in Vienna just because I wanted to see Vienna. I didn't expect to meet any interesting startups at all. And I was invited to be a judge on some thing. And this company started presenting, and they were presenting a piece of hardware that expecting mother puts on her stomach, and you can hear the baby's heartbeat. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I'm hearing this description. And the first thought I have is like, oh, like, this is a great idea, but I bet they haven't built anything. And then she holds it up and says, here it is. And then my second thought is like, oh, like, I bet there's all kinds of FDA crap. It's like, and we have FDA approval. And then I'm like, well, I bet they haven't sold any of them. We already have 20,000 orders. And like, literally, I was just like, huh, holy shit, this is a great company. And for me, that was so instrumental because one, it's hardware. YC typically does software, although we do tons of hardware now. Two, I was in a place where I wasn't expecting to meet great founders. But three, they executed their business. Like, it was like they just went step by step and did the things they needed to do to execute their business. And like, my issues were issues about whether they could execute. It had nothing to do with the idea. I didn't care about the idea one way or the other. I was impressed that they just did it, that they didn't talk about it, they did it. And every one of her talking points was about doing something, not about the idea or the problem in the market or the pain or my vision or my story and why this is inspirational bullshit. It's, I want to build the thing, I built it, and I'm selling it. And then that forced me to say, what am I going to do? And it went from she was pitching me to I was pitching her. And that company did YC, got funded. They're selling like, I don't know, $20 million plus of hardware.
Yeah, they're doing well.
They're doing very, very well. So like you want to be that person. And they came out of Croatia. The funding environment was zero. So like that's like the model that always sticks in my head. It's just like anyone can do this, but like I'm trying to separate the talkers out. Nobody cares about the talkers.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I mean, we funded like 222 companies in our core program last year with another 60 in fellowship. So there's almost an endless version of this, but the conversations and the experience fill a similar arc in the sense of, I mean, the company I'm doing a Snapchat takeover for Way Up, which is a company called Campus Job. When I read the application, it's essentially a website that allows new college graduates to find internships and then ultimately jobs afterwards. So it's not, when you read the description, you're like, okay, like it's like and then when we actually, you look at Liz and JJ, you look at their backgrounds and you look at what they'd already accomplished. I mean, they were already signing, I mean, when they came in for the interview, they were signing up like tens of thousands of students per week. That's hard to ignore. You can hate the idea, but I mean, literally, the logic was like, let's just meet them. Like these are good numbers. Like let's just meet them. And then in the interview, you realize that they're approaching the market in a very different way that nobody else in the recruiting world, which is very saturated with lots of companies, is actually thinking about. And so at that point, you have that like, this is something I'm willing to take a bet on. And so it's not that. I don't want you guys to take away from our examples that, oh, you need a business with traction. We fund lots of businesses that have zero traction, but there is always this like somewhat of an aha moment where you're like, oh, I can plausibly believe that these 2 to 3 people with the skills that they have and the approach to the market, maybe they have a background in the space, they were ex-farmers, they're building farming technology, they worked in oil and gas, they're building oil and gas sensors, or they have a unique insight, and they're entering the market that you want to take a bet on them. And it's not, I think everyone looks for another way about, maybe there's some special trick, and it isn't. It's really just straightforward, do you have the right skills? Have you made progress? And are you on the path to something that could potentially be big?
Awesome. So maybe one more question, and then we'll open it up. I was thinking when I was listening to Patrick Collison yesterday from Stripe, awesome fellow Irishman. He's done incredible things at Stripe so far, himself and his brother John, and they're just on a path to do way more with Stripe Atlas. Y Combinator graduate, really inspiring story, right? So, I mean, I guess, do we think they stand a chance at really disrupting the area they're in? And
no, they already have.
And 2, how do we get more Stripes, I guess, is my question, right? I mean, it's a really inspiring company. We're a partner of them, right? We're actually powering Stripe Atlas on the back end, Silicon Valley Bank. But how do you get there, and how do you create more Stripes and more Patricks?
As an incubator,
Yeah.
or how do founders do it? Because as an incubator, I don't know if that helps them at all.
You want to talk about a Crystal Tower story you told about, or Justin was telling about Tuesday night, about how you guys all lived together, and I'll tell you the story. So early on in YC, I didn't live in Crystal Towers, but there was a building in North Beach
Yes.
that tons of YC founders lived in, and Michael and Justin were
That I found.
Michael and Justin, and it was the reason a lot of founders lived there because they furnished an apartment, they did short-term leases and stuff like that other apartments weren't doing. And so there's 10 companies or whatever based out of there. And then in the last couple of years, this conversation happened. I was like, oh wow, that building had a bunch of geniuses. Reddit came out of there, Stripe came out of there, Dropbox came out of there.
Weebly came out of there.
Weebly, I mean, Weebly serves 25% of American internet traffic. I mean, just huge companies out of this apartment building. And the point is made is oh, these guys like Patrick and John, if you fall in this category,
Yeah.
are there must be geniuses. There must be something special. And you realize actually they're not geniuses. They're just like me and you. And I think it's important to recognize, though, even though we're sitting here, the distance between us is very, very little. Our understanding of the startup ecosystem is not actually that much greater than yours. And the way our society works and the way culture works, there's always this belief that the people who are on stage somehow have some special knowledge in their head, and then you don't. And I think that is an incorrect starting point. And if you believe that, then you believe there's many Stripes in this room. There is a very real possibility that there's founders in this room who are going to start billion-dollar companies or $5 or $10 billion companies. So getting rid of this, I think we as human beings and the way we've kind of evolved, we like stories and we like those creator myths. But I think the truth is a lot less glamorous. It's just people working and then continuing to serve their customers and continuing to serve their customers, and then they wake up 5, 10 years later, and I mean, Michael started a $1 billion company, and I think if you spend a lot of time with Michael, as I do, I don't think he believes that he's just just had some great insight. He's just working at it for a long time.
I mean, the thing that always impressed me about John and Patrick was that when they started Stripe, what they did was they went into people's office and they said, we will actually integrate it for you.
It's a payment company. It helps you accept payments on your website.
And it was that level of, one, you're not interacting with a sales team. You're not interacting with some marketing guy. No. You're interacting with 2 engineers who are going to come in and sit right next to you and do it for you, if that's what it takes to get something done, if that's what it takes to get the first customer. And the reason why people don't become Stripe isn't because they had bad ideas. It's because they're not willing to do the work.
Yeah.
They don't realize that this game is a grind, and for every manicured PR story about how good and how amazing this company is, there is just so much shit work that isn't spoken about. And so they think that this world, I always equate it to the NBA. They look at Kobe Bryant and look at people in the NBA and they're like, oh man, great, I can be this. And they don't see all the people who tried and failed. And they don't see every day that Kobe's sitting there and shooting and not eating this food and not taking that drink and not going to this party. They don't see any of that. And so it's like, if you're not willing to make sacrifices to do this, and you're trying to do something that very few people do, and if you're not willing to do the hard work, go work at Google.
Yeah. I did. It's it's
You
true.
did, yeah. I was gonna say he got, his company got acquired by Google, so he ended up working there.
Yeah, it's not a, yeah. I mean, that's a fine path. There's no judgment. I think an important thing too is like, it's just, again, like the way humans receive and organize information is I wouldn't say that one is better. It's not that the
No.
founder path is better than the Google path, or the restaurant owner is better than the guy who drives the bus. It's just those are different paths, and you're making if you choose this path, if you want to go on this journey to have outcomes like building a company like Stripe, there's real sacrifices you have to make, and you just have to be ready to make those sacrifices. And then you can't not make them and say, well, they got lucky.
Exactly.
There's luck involved in everything. We're all fortunate enough and lucky enough to be in a situation where we can sit here together in a stable country and everything. There's luck involved in life, but there's also once we control for those things, all of that opportunity exists for us.
So, shall we open it up for questions? You got some questions? Shoot. Yeah, the lady at the back first. Put up her hand.
Hi, you mentioned traction when you're looking when someone's applying. How does startup judge what's the appropriate traction and timing to apply for Y Combinator?
How does a startup judge what's the appropriate level of traction? That's interesting. Like, I can tell you the way I do it. And it's basically like, I look at where the company is, like what industry it is, right? So let's just make it really simple. Software, hardware, right? If it's a software company, my metric is like pretty simple. Have they launched? If not, why? How long have they been around? And the excuses for why they haven't launched get more and more unreasonable the closer they get to a year. So the closer you are to a year in a software company, you haven't launched anything, there's no beta, there's no anything. It's just like, wow, I mean, few things in software, you can't get something out there within a year.
I'd almost venture to say none. I can't think of an example
think of
in
anything,
my
yeah.
mind. I'm thinking, well, there's like you Stripe. Stripe, I'm sure for the first couple of months we're already doing things and positive.
Yeah. If it's a hardware company, it's a little bit different. I basically do that, but with the kind of prototype. So like, how many prototypes have they built in the period of time? How usable is it? How close to usable is this thing? And so that all of that stuff applies pre-launch. But I think then like, what this really gets to is like two things. One, is the team effective? And then two, does the team understand that the first version of what they build is gonna suck? So do you wanna spend 6 weeks working on something that sucks, or 6 months, or 2 years? It's gonna suck either way. So like, I'm looking for the teams that only wanna spend 6 weeks working on something that's gonna suck. Then they show it to customers, and then they start making it good. So that's kind of how I do the judgment. If there is a startup anywhere close to your space that's moving faster than you, then you're behind.
I would add, I think a founder is really made or born in the moment that the first version of the product hits the market and they have to get feedback. So if you don't do that, you're not born. Like if a startup fails and you never launch, you were never a startup. Like that, like that's probably like a truth. So you have your hardware device and you show it to Michael, who's a potential customer, and then Michael says, well, maybe I'd use this, or I don't like this, and then at that moment, the founder has to interpret what's coming out of Michael's mouth as, how do I now improve this product to make Michael really be a huge fan? And just rinse and repeat.
And you can have just one. It could just be one prototype.
Yeah.
And you're showing me the janky single prototype.
To get feedback.
To get feedback.
And then how do you interpret that feedback? Because there's a lot, there's a lot of, like I'll give you our example. When we came into YC, we were enterprise focused. We're selling to large clients because they're willing to pay millions of dollars for this product. And PG said, hey, why don't you go to local businesses, sell it so you can get the product in market immediately. You already have built. Now you're just waiting for these large customers. just get into small business so you can just see how people start using it. So we sell to hundreds of locations up and down the valley, and we see all these messages. It's consumer to business messaging, all these messages coming through, and then we realize actually, like, most of this stuff is not feedback. There are things like, are you hiring, and is this, like, do you deliver, and all these other questions. You're like, oh, actually, we're not building a feedback tool. We're building a messaging product from consumers to businesses, and that, like, insight is, I think, where our company really starts. That's when we're really born. And so you can't even get to that insight if we're just sitting in a conference room talking about, wouldn't it be cool? No, it wouldn't be cool. If you ever have that thought as a founder, like, wouldn't it be cool? Remember this talk and just hear me say, no, it's not cool. Because that's not the whole point. The point is not to make wouldn't it be cool. The point is to get the product into the market and get feedback from the market. That's all a startup is. You're selling a service. And if you're not even talking to the people you're selling it to, you're not selling it then. You're not a business.
Okay, next question. Yes.
So in 2013, you guys funded Stylen, and then just recently this year, you funded Curtsy, which is the exact same model, and it's a little peer-to-peer clothing rental, which is what I do in Singapore.
We funded about 5 of those, actually, total.
I'm sorry?
We funded about 5 of those total throughout the whole of YC.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
is there anything like interesting about those founders? It's like the same concept, and they'll essentially be competing against each other. Like, what's really going to make fun?
They're not really
They're
going to
not
be competing against each other. Like,
They're not.
yeah, the standard case of a startup is it dies.
Yeah.
It's not like it's competing. It's
The
that,
default
like,
is death.
The default is death. And so, like, we want to just fund good, motivated people who are getting their thing started, and we'll keep.
Yeah, it's
we'll
unfortunate
keep
reality
funding.
that we're competing against each other. So that's point number one. Point two, like even a more clear evidence of us funding multiple companies in the same space is delivery stuff in the valley. All the big or most of the big delivery companies are YC companies. So that's DoorDash, that's Caviar, that's Order Ahead. I mean, there's the little Instacart. These are all YC companies. And so people say like, oh, why do you fund competitors? It's like we're not thematic. We don't say like dress rental. Now let's find founders who are doing that. We don't do that. That's very important. We sit across the table and we say, does this founder, do they have an interesting insight? Have they launched? All the stuff we've talked about. And then at the end of the conversation is thumbs up or thumbs down. And that's it. And then we're like, oh, yeah, I guess this is kind of like Stylen. But there's also a false recognition because most of our view of business is informed by large companies, Pepsi's and the Coca-Cola. So people think about this like zero-sum game. The market is saturated and we're splitting up the market. Vast majority of early stage companies are creating markets or going into greenfield opportunities. So it's not this let's cut up this existing pie. It is growing a pie. So if you think about that nature that most companies die, you're growing the pie, and the market is itself are massive multi-billion-dollar markets. Rarely are these companies going to bump into each other.
On that, can you tell us, like, what are the 2 areas that you're most excited about? So stuff that you're seeing coming in right now, or 2 areas?
I'm not excited about anything.
Likewise,
Like, I actually, like,
yeah.
the answer to that question is, like, I want to be so clear. There is literally no industry I care about. There's no industry where you can be like, this is the hot thing. No one will be able to tweet out, YC thinks this is the hot space. No, we don't care. YC is an index on what founders think is interesting. That's it. Like, and when we put out, like, requests for services, what we really are doing is trying to communicate that, like, we will take ideas from everywhere. We were funding hardware way before we put out a request for services for hardware. But we did that because we just wanted to make sure all the people who are interested in hardware knew we fund it. Ditto with VR, ditto with everything else. So it's like, there's no hot space. And it takes 10 years to build a huge company. Anything that's the hot space today, who knows if it's the hot space 10 years from now?
10 years is a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 years ago, like, YouTube barely existed. Like, I mean, like, Wikipedia was maybe a year or 2 old. Facebook was a couple years old. I mean, like, the things that, like, Snapchat, Twitter, these things that are nowhere near existing. I mean, so 10 years is a lifetime away. I think Charlie Munger from Berkshire says it best. He says, I become a better investor the more that I realize the limitations of my knowledge.
Yes.
We don't know what the trends are.
No.
Please refer back to my earlier comment that there isn't a distance. It's really, we could be sitting in the audience and you could be on it. There's not a huge difference.
Sir.
Can you describe the recruiting process? Can you describe the nurturing graduation process, how you work with investors, ecosystem, and also the pathway of the graduation?
Good question. So the question is for those who didn't hear. It's about the nurturing graduation process.
I like how you said death rate, because that's real talk, and like that's what startups is. So when I look at YC, there are a couple of ways that we really add value. I think the first thing we do is we put everyone together in a batch. And by doing that, you basically have this group of people who want to support each other, and it's a group of people who are moving very, very quickly. And so it's a great way to know, do you have what it takes? Are you moving fast? And if not, to move faster. Because you see everyone around you is smart, and they're all moving fast, and so you can do it too. And the second thing that we do is it goes to one of the things that Castor said about having clear communication. We really, really work with our companies on how to describe themselves clearly and simply. I think the next thing that we do is we emphasize growth above most other things. Because startup, if it's not growing, is dying. And so we get people to take all of the silly concerns off the plate. You know, founders are always concerned about the thing that's going to kill them 2 years from now, as opposed to the thing that's going to kill them right now, which is not growing. And so we like to take all those things off the table. The next thing is alumni. You have this large group of people who have done things and had experiences that you can steal from. And literally, because someone helped them 1, 2, 5, 10 years ago, when you email them, they will help you. And people always find it surprising when they email like Drew from Dropbox, and Drew emails them back. And it's because you guys are both YC companies. I think the last thing we do is we try to, probably not the last, but the last thing I'll emphasize is we try to balance the balance of power between investors and startups slightly more towards startups. We try to create a situation where investors are more trying to hunt after you as opposed to you're trying to hunt after them. And we have this, the program is designed in many ways to create this investor feeding frenzy. And that can be very helpful. So those are the high levels. I'm sure I missed stuff, but that's high levels.
Next question, here in the front.
States that good founders are people that are relentlessly resourceful. No? So, I mean, the things in the beginning are very different when you are preparing your startup to scale. So, how can YC help founders to maintain a consistent level of exceptional performance?
Okay, so the question is around resilience and performance. How does YC help founders at the earliest stages keep going? Is that your question?
The transition founders need to have when they are in the startup, like in the beginning, in very early stage, is very different when you are preparing your startup for scaling. So as founder, you need to like keep a consistent level of.
My first response to you is this is the type of question that is always tricky because most startups never transition.
Yeah.
You're asking a question that like what happens when I'm hiring my 1,000th employee? Most startups never get
You
there.
can email me when you're doing that.
Yeah.
There's so few people who will do that. You can personally email me and say, I'm at my 1,000th employee.
And if that's what you're worried about, like that's one of the things, or if you told me that's what you're worried about, I'd be like, hey, let's cross that off. One less thing to worry about.
So you think it's better like always manage your company as a startup, like small team?
I'm not trying to say that. All I'm trying to say is that like manage your company is at scale is something that you have to learn how to do when your company's achieving scale. And like for most companies, for most startups, that's never a challenge they have.
Yeah, to use the professional analogy, it's like saying, what am I going to do when I get to the playoffs or get to the finals in the NBA? Where should my head be? It's like, let's get you into college first.
Yeah.
Right, and then we'll get you in the NBA, and then, but when you're at the finals game, believe me, I'll be courtside.
Yeah. You can ask me everything you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, let's go over here.
One of the YC alums, Brian Chesky, was just speaking, and he said that a lot of times great ideas that sound stupid. So how do you guys protect yourselves from that? Or do you think you have diversity?
I hate ideas. Like, I don't like thinking about ideas I think there's two ways of thinking about ideas. One is as a user, and one is not as a user. The second you think of an idea as a user, your brain's screwed up, like from an investor perspective. Because so many things that get pitched to us, we're just not going to be the user for. And if we try to basically pretend like we're the user, it's like, oh, I'm selling small business software to dentists, right? If I look at that and it's like, and I'm solving these 3 problems, if I pretend like I'm a dentist and try to figure out if dentists are going to want that, I got nothing. I'm not a dentist, right? And so for me, like the way that I kind of avoid this problem is that I very quickly in the beginning of reading the application say, am I a user or not? 9 times out of 10, I'm not a user. And then like there's certain things I assume, or there's certain things I'll look for in the application. Like I'll look for, there are a couple of questions that kind of speak to how do you know about this problem, or what's your unique insight on this problem? And I basically look for some evidence that you understand the user. And if it seems like you understand the user, I'm giving you credit for like you understand the user. And I'm not trying to think, am I the user, therefore I think this is a good idea. And in applications where I am the user, sometimes I recuse myself. Like, because sometimes I actually, sometimes people do this where in the spaces that are too close to them, like with video startups for me. Like sometimes I bring in too many assumptions if I'm going to be the user. I would have thought Snapchat sucked, right? So like, when I'm sitting in that situation, I'm like, I don't want to look at it. So that's different when you get further along, I think, when your business gets further along. But I think like super early stage, the number one mistake that people make is this idea that like, I have to think it's a good idea. Like, who am I? If I knew every good idea, I'd have a lot of other interesting things to do.
Wow, okay. Next question.
So, how about the process of screening NDOs? So you mentioned the startups, but what about the NDOs? What do you take into account?
Are you asking about the not-for-profit?
Nonprofits, yeah.
Yeah. What's the process to screen not-for-profit companies?
I don't think it's different. I would add, instead of billion-dollar company, I think I'd replace that with, can this make a worldwide impact? But everything else,
I would say in nonprofits there is a particular problem, which I think maybe for-profits see less of, which is like even more issues with commitment and determination. I feel like we've had more nonprofits we've given money to that just quit. They're just like, oh, suddenly I want to pursue my PhD, and I think, or like whatever, like the infinite excuses.
A higher rate than other types of companies?
Yeah, I mean, we've had nonprofits that flame out like 3 months after YC, and
well,
you're
I
like,
think it's harder because I think that like, one, there's no payoff.
Right.
2, oftentimes there isn't a clear business model. And 3, like the funding environment is horrible.
yeah,
So it's like, I would have kind of expected.
tough,
It's
yeah.
really tough.
Harder
Much harder
find
than doing a
financing?
startup.
Harder to find VC?
It's
Well,
impossible
VC,
to find
well, yeah,
VC. They
VCs
don't
are-
invest.
they're not in the business. Of
Yeah, you're
putting-
asking for donations.
Yeah, venture capitalists are capitalists. They're looking to invest to get a higher return on their capital. So you're really looking for people who are just generously donating. I mean, that's why when I work with nonprofits, the goal is really immediately to talk about how do we do this sustainably.
Yep. How do we get to break even?
Saying that, though, do you see more companies that have got a social impact? It could be for-profit, but have a social impact as
Yeah,
well.
I don't consider that to be a separate category.
Okay.
I think that's that we don't, or at least we don't like.
We don't like funding
You don't
companies that want to hurt the
differentiate.
world.
Yeah, we literally won't.
They're doing the thing that they say they want to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question, sir.
So do you have a global expansion strategy, like opening office somewhere else, like say Asia or something?
We take a lot of companies from outside of America. I think we typically anywhere between 15 and 20 countries are represented every year.
That's like a third of the batch.
Yeah, it's like a third of the batch. And what's really funny is that like if you just look at U.S. citizens, I think it's only half the batch is
I bet
U.S.
you do
citizens.
less than that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're aggressively international. I think that like our current opinion is that there's something going on here in the Valley that we actually can uniquely expose founders to. And actually sometimes international founders can find more value here. And so our leverage is being able to bring people here. Now sometimes they want to stay, sometimes they need to go back, their customers are there. But exposure to this environment, the people who are here, the funders who are here, is kind of one of YC's competitive advantages. And so I think a lot of times when people think about international expansion, they think the only way we can touch international founders is by opening up an office there. It's like, actually, I think we serve them far better by recruiting them and bringing them here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so in case you don't know, YC, the program, you move here to the Valley in person for 12 weeks, right? 3 months. So that's what you got to do. That's the
Yeah,
commitment.
and a lot of companies end up staying too. I mean, the best analogy actually to use is, or one analogy I think I found useful is, if you wanted to be like a famous actor or actress. Now, you can do acting and act, anywhere in the world. You can do it in Detroit, you can do it in Vienna, you can do it in Beijing, you can do it anywhere. And there are great, successful people who do it as a living in those cities. But if you want to be Tom Hanks and you want to do a blockbuster, you got to live in LA. And you might hate LA, as Tom Hanks probably does.
LA sucks.
But guess what? That's where like the trailers are made. That's where the marketing shots are done. That's where that's where the cameramen live. That's where the the money is for funding large-scale hero movies. And so Tom Hanks is like, well, I always wanted to live in Boise, but I'm going to live in LA. And that's just a reality of the situation. So Silicon Valley, like, let's just not fool ourselves, definitely has a huge advantage in tech. And the easiest way to objectively say that, as not as a qualitative opinion, is just look at performance. The largest companies in software are based 10 minutes from here. And will that be forever? Probably not. Will it be in our lifetime? Probably. There's a very small, I mean, this ecosystem has been around for 50, 60, 70 years. And so the question really becomes, are there new emerging markets that could fundamentally change it? Of course, we don't know what the future is. China is a fundamentally different environment with 1.3 billion customers. India is a very different environment. Southeast Asia, I mean, there's a lot of countries that fulfill that. But if you're a founder and you want to be Tom Hanks, this is probably the place to do it.
You should at least visit LA.
Yeah,
Come
exactly.
visit. Mom.
We started in Egypt, and now I founded Eventus. It's an engagement platform for events, and we're doing very well there in the Middle East. Actually, we opened a new office in Dubai, and now we're almost dominating the market there. And we're growing 7,000 events, and we're doubling our revenues every quarter. But there's always a question: should we apply to YC? Should we move to the US?
So, okay, we really need to separate these two things. Applying to YC does not mean you're moving your company to the US forever. There actually are a significant number of international companies that come here for YC and go back, like a significant number. So to me, these are just two decisions. Applying to YC is a decision, is that good for your company or not? Moving to the US is a decision, is that good for your company or not? They're not linked at all. So the real question I'd ask you is like, not should we move to the US, is do you think YC would be helpful? That's the question. And then like make the decision of moving to the US based on what's good for your business.
You should focus on the market that will buy your product.
Yeah.
And if the product you've built right now is being consumed in MENA, that's what you should do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, without getting too deep into like your specific company, because we'll make sure the information is general enough for everybody here. You should let your customers lead. This is not an abstract conversation of you want to be a global company and therefore let's like open up a Shanghai office. That's not. This is probably not.
And it's just important to separate
logical.
these things out. Like it's like you know what's good for your business. Like you're gonna know what's good for your business better than we are. You're gonna know your customers better than we will. And so like whether you want to expand the United States should be something that you consider completely independently of whether you want to do YC or whatever else. And like we don't, like I think a lot of international founders believe that we only accept companies that focus on US markets. That's the furthest thing from the truth. Like over there is building Stripe for Africa. It's not focusing on the US market at all. Like he just went through YC. So like we don't care. Build them for the market that you want to build for.
Build for the market that you need to build for. Sir?
Yeah, Afsar, this question is for you. How did you become YC partner?
Paul Graham asked me.
Sexy story.
Yeah, I mean, it was like Paul Graham just said, hey, do you want to be a partner in a parking lot? I mean, like that's, I mean, like the venture business, and generally speaking, is not a online application type business. Like And I'm sure Michael is similarly. I mean, these are very bespoke jobs. So
That makes it
it's
sound
not very useful for most of the audience, to be honest.
Thank you. That was from Justin.
What's that?
That was from Justin.
Oh, from Justin.
Oh,
Yeah, so
God.
I'll tell, that's why it was such a bad question.
There it is.
Sir?
So how do you leave like your preconceptions at the door? Because sometimes, like if you look at Instacart, for instance, like Webvan occurred like 10 years before that. A lot of people got burned, and then they might say, "I'm not going to fund anything like that." So you have to
For
So how do you leave
YC
your preconceptions at the door?
You have to understand the structure of YC. Funding an incremental company is extremely inexpensive for us, right? If you're a VC and you're writing a $10 million check and you write 2 of those a year, you have to think a lot. For us, whether the batch has 106 or 107 companies, that doesn't change much. We have to cook a little bit more food, right? And so it frees us to just not care. Like each one of these decisions, like an interview in YC takes 10 minutes and we decide in the following 2 to 4 minutes. These aren't like deliberative like sessions over the course of years, right? And so, yeah, that's just, we're looking to fund young, hungry people, old, hungry people as well, who are getting stuff done. And then let's see what happens.
On that point, our median age, by the way, another misconception I would say at YC is that we fund like 22-year-old white Stanford males who majored in computer science, and that's, I mean, if the partnership is any representation of that, it's probably not true. But our median age is 30, so half of the founders are over 30 that we're funding. That's an important thing. Most people just don't envision that. To get to your answer to question specifically about how do you make sure your mind is always accepting new ideas, I mean, we talked about it today. We had a multi-hour meeting to talk about this today, about how do we make sure we're not believing too much of our own views of the world. And so I think you can very consciously and constantly and consistently say, we don't know, we don't know. If it sounds particularly bad, we should look at it with even more. Like, that's the thing about investing counterintuitively or doing anything counterintuitively. It's counterintuitive. So your intuition immediately rejects it. So it's doubly hard to accept this new idea because you've already concluded at some base level that it's one way or the other.
Yeah, we say, in our group, we say, trust your instinct, get the data, make a decision. Try and do it pretty quickly. Next question. Yes?
Just apropos, you mentioned the 30-year-old median age. I'm curious, have you had parents with young kids who come?
Yes.
Yeah, many.
Can you talk a little bit about the experience, people who may be not able to immerse 24/7?
Oh, they immerse 24/7.
Yeah. I
You
think
got
those are
you got to immerse 24/7 your startup. So we had this great team that was building net zero homes, homes that use no energy, and they were located in St. Louis, and they got into YC, and it was I think it was 3 founders. 2 of them were married with 2 kids, and they moved to San Francisco and or the Bay Area. They rented a house. Everyone lived in it, and they just dealt with it. I mean, the startup's gonna suck, and you have kids. That means it's just gonna be even harder. But there's no what I would say is there is no work-life balance in startups. Like that doesn't exist. So it's they just had to muscle through, and they did a great job. And I'm sure it was 2 times more stressful for them than other founders. But they signed up for it and they did it. And when I saw that, and I was like. And the female founder is pregnant with a 3rd kid right now, and they're still killing it. And I'm like,
That's awesome.
they got what it takes.
Analogous, so we're just using these analogies, but a professional sports athlete who says, I really want to eat chocolate every day. And that's just the unfortunate truth that you have to deal with, or I'm not tall enough,
Yeah, I think it's the size thing. It's Muggsy Bogues was 5'2" and got in NBA and was a great player.
Now,
it's harder,
yeah,
but
it's
he did
harder. Yeah, and structurally, it's advantageous to be able to not have those obligations. I'm a parent, I have 2 kids. It's easier not to because then you can live with your co-founders and do some things like that. But does that mean that you're guaranteed to be unsuccessful? No, not at all. No, I mean that's just it is harder, but you're signing up for it.
Yeah,
That's good to know. Right, we have less than 2 minutes, so on that, I think we need to wrap up. Final thoughts, Michael. If someone in this room is going to apply to Y Combinator and you want to leave them with one guidance, one piece of advice as they leave the room, what is it?
read through your application, assume the person who's reading your application is an idiot. They don't understand any acronyms. They don't understand any jargon. They have done no research on your industry. They basically know nothing. And maybe find one of those people and have them read it and make sure they can understand it.
Pitch your mother.
Yeah, mom, I hate mom because she's going to be nice. She's like, you know, someone who's not going to be nice to you is just going to tell you, I do not understand this. Do not.
Pitch your ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, ex-girlfriend, ex-boyfriend. Do
It's a
not.
terrible idea.
Do not
You're
hand
terrible.
it.
Harsh.
Do not hand it to your MBA friend. Do not hand it to your friend who you think is a business expert. Do not hand it to anyone who makes the language more impressive, who's trying to make you sound more impressive. Don't use SAT vocab words. Like, don't sound impressive. Your first goal is to sound clear. If you can sound clear, you've already beaten 95% of the other applications.
Okay, good. Keep it simple. That's our last piece of advice if you're going to apply.
You can always reach out to me.
There you go.
Casar@ycombinator.com, QASAR, or my initials, QY@ycombinator.com.
That's really hard. There's also Michael@ycombinator.com.
Yeah, well, this is why Michael gets all the attention.
All the good ones.
Yeah, all the good ones. Yeah, and yeah, I'm also, you know, all the other like social channels. I'm always at Casar. But the point I would make is like, yeah, I think just getting rid of this like false notion that we know something more than you guys. It's not true.
Couple
Nice.
idiots.
Guys, thank you so much for
Thank you,
uncovering
guys.
it. Thank you.